So, Erin, our analyst Alvin there saying that he does believe that it looks like we've reached a peak in prices. So perhaps they've peaked, but I do wonder how much of a comfort will that be for nations still having to shell out for food that's more expensive than average?
Yeah, thanks so much. Right, as you mentioned, food prices reached a record level actually in March, which was a very concerning level for food prices in the world. They have been coming down in recent months. We saw them ease again in August, which is the good news. But the bad news, as you mentioned, is that food prices are still really, really high. They're still even marginally above previous record set before this year, which is in 2011. So seeing food prices still really high, and a point of concern is the fact that cereals, which have been a main driver of these price increases, remain very high. They actually decreased the least this month. And as you know, in cereals, wheat is a very important staple food for a lot of countries in the world. So right now, with prices so high, especially with the U.S. dollar so strong, that will make importing those supplies really expensive for a lot of countries.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go next, Erin, in terms of dollar impact for these nations that are facing weaker currency. In terms of the geological divide, where does it seem in terms of who's facing the most pressure from that, the need to pay up more, again, because of the divergencies among global currencies?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, it's countries that rely on imports for their food needs. So, import-dependent countries, also low-income countries, especially those that are facing economic challenges in the wake of the pandemic. Also, concern has been countries, especially in Middle East and Northern Africa, that are typically big importers of wheat, especially from Ukraine and Russia. So now that the supplies have been disrupted from that region, from the Black Sea region, for nearly 6 months now, that obviously, has created higher costs for those countries to import the wheat that they need.
Erin, what will it take to see normalization? In other words, how far away are we from a level that's more comfortable?
Well, like I mentioned, prices are still above the 2011 record, so we still have a ways for prices to come down. And I think it's really important that the export flows out of Ukraine continue. We saw prices drop in response to the opening of ports in Ukraine pretty quickly in July. So that is it's very clear that that's having a big impact in helping to bring prices down by boosting supplies. So for that to continue, I think, is a really essential part of that happening.
How worried are you? This is a narrative that picked up speed after Russia first invaded Ukraine. This idea that we would see more hoarding of commodities, of assets, be it agriculture, be it energy. Does that seem like a threat that could be lived out, or are we less concerned about that than perhaps we were at the beginning of the war?
Yeah, at the beginning of the war, there were certainly kind of a wave of a lot of policies being implemented to kind of protect domestic supplies, which, when you see that happening in major exporting countries, especially restricting exports, that will push up prices, that puts pressure on markets, which is something we want to try to avoid. So it does seem that has started to improve that situation. Again, like I said, even the fact that ports opened, Ukraine's starting to see markets open a little bit more, and that's something that we need to see continue.
When it comes to the impact of droughts we've seen and extreme climate from, not just droughts, but floods in other regions as well, if this is the new normal, Erin, what does it mean in preparing for the global food trade? What does it mean for global agriculture going forward? Are there structural changes that need to be made if this is the new reality of climate?
Yeah, this year we're forecasting to see a pretty big fall in maize production, for example, at the global level, which is making maize markets really tight. And that puts upward pressure on maize markets, which also in turn puts pressure on wheat markets, which is, as I mentioned, a very important food staple. So that fall in production really has a big impact. It's something that countries need to be very cognizant of. And, as weather patterns get more and more extreme, this year we've seen really hot and dry conditions in the European Union, really cut into their maize production. We've seen hot conditions in India cutting into their wheat production, now flooding in Pakistan, maybe increasing the needs, the food demand that they have there. So, looking at production and putting in place support for producers to try to ward against these really extreme weather patterns, as they get worse and worse, is going to be really important. And again, mostly support to producers for them to be able to weather the costs of production that comes with. This year, we're already seeing record high, especially now with record high, energy prices and fertilizer prices being a very big concern, especially in the European Union for fertilizer production. As we see inputs become more expensive and farmers unable to purchase those inputs, that is going to be something that governments really need to help support the producers with.